Good afternoon, everybody. I came, I think, prepared to expect there was a little more debate about the subject, but I think maybe it is more determined already than I was led to believe. I think, however, if we take the first item on the agenda head on, is Lickerman the right way forward? I think picking up on Mrs. McCarthy's points, if the aim is to make banks smaller, if the aim is to support ex-ante resolution measures, if the aim is to prevent banks from using guaranteed retail deposits to fund risky trading activities, then I think the answer has to be probably yes. It's by no means, though, from my perspective, the only option, or indeed possibly the best. But it's also one that's been tried at least twice in history before, and subsequently there have been periods of stability. However, if we go down this route, we do have to accept all of the consequences. It is by no means a nirvana. In general, when I look at banking organisations, I support the idea that diversification is in itself a risk mitigant. Picking up on Daniel's earlier comments, if there is not diversification within a large organisation, that is a problem. But if you have large organisations, large financial organisations in the system, diversification within them mitigates against their position. But separation itself may therefore lead to narrower business models. They may be smaller by definition, but not necessarily less risky, either individually or collectively. And having separated them, we may actually encourage what are perceived to be lower risk businesses to take more risk in the future. One other dynamic we see within the financial sector is progressive localization. Now, arguably, there are moves to address this one because fundamentally it comes from the lack of cross-border resolution measures, which has caused politicians and regulators to move to protect their own reputations by dealing with what they can actually deal with within their own local systems. I fear, however, that by moving trading businesses which are inherently more international away from the businesses perceived to be more domestic, we add further incentive towards this dynamic. I'm not old enough to remember, but I'm told that if you go back to the 1930s trade wars, it was driven by a perception that what looked sensible on a country-by-country basis was not actually for the greater good. Having said all of this, from my point of view, one of the most compelling arguments for Lickerman actually goes against localization. We do have proposals from the US. We have proposals for Vickers in the UK. There are February's proposals in France and last month's proposals in Germany. But for industries that are fundamentally aimed at doing all of the things that have been talked about, including allocating resources on a cross-border basis, having different sets of rules in different countries can only lead to huge inefficiencies. Businesses need to have clarity. One of the things I find most intriguing about the UK is there has been some talk about electrifying ring fences. We have talk of walls with doors in. You can't play any game or run any business without clarity about where the dividing lines are. So Lickerman has the advantage of setting clarity across the marketplace within the EU as to what the rules are. And there should also be clarity around the definitions and the application of those to ensure that we have a level playing field both for competition but also clarity for all the stakeholders that use financial services and invest in financial services as to what organisations actually are doing and not doing. I do want to pick up on a couple of other points, though. I think Mr. McCarthy mentioned that issues still keep coming up, and indeed they do. But the banks have recognised that the cultures that permeated them, up to and still do after the crisis, need to change. Most of the financial services organisations I talk to are going through that. But culture is not something that you can change at the flick of a switch. It took a decade to get to where we were in 2007, and may take as long to get back to where we would like banks to be. We're talking about influencing behaviours in very large organisations. I'm also not entirely sure that investment culture is really the devil here. If I look at some of the banks that got themselves into trouble, distribution, retail, sales culture was actually the problem, without really a focus on risk. That last word brings me to my final point. I believe that there is a need for enhanced risk governance, and most organisations have seen that. It is a process that a lot of financial services businesses are going through. Likkonen rightly refers to this as the fifth of the 5 core recommendations, but I think we mustn't lose sight of it, whether we have banks that are split or banks that carry on unseparated. Whatever the shape or size of banks, it is essential that it's clear to all the stakeholders the risk that those organisations are taking. Daniel also referred to the idea that we mustn't be fighting the past wars. We must look to the future. Post-mortems on those past wars have indicated that governance and tone from the top have been fundamentally failed in these organisations, whether it be in the Spanish Cajas or whether it be in the more recent report on HBOS in the UK. Few of us can forget, though, Chuck Prince's famous quote, that as long as the music is playing, you've got to get up and dance. Now, from my point of view, whether banks operate in the future with more capital, whether they have higher liquidity requirements, whether they're separated, whether they have mandated business models, we've all got to get better at understanding when the music might stop for a particular business model in this sector, and ensuring that when it does, there are sufficient chairs for everybody. Thank you.